Many youth in Chicago have already experienced tremendous amounts of adversity and trauma in their lives at a very young age.
The greatest public health emergency that no one knows about is not some infectious disease, but what we're talking about is what happens in the home. In the late 90s, a landmark public health study was conducted by the Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente, and it was called the Adverse Childhood Experiences, or ACEs study for short. And what the CDC discovered is quite relevant to what's happening in our city today. Researchers surveyed over 17,000 adults about their history of childhood trauma, which spanned 10 different categories of abuse, neglect, and household stress. And they asked questions like, were you ever sexually abused? Was anyone in your household ever incarcerated? Were your parents ever so drunk or too high to take care of you? And what they found is that the more ACEs a person has, the higher risk they would be for a wide array of poor health or unhealthy behaviors. And let me break this down. If you have an ACE score of 4, you'd have over a 2 times greater chance of having heart disease compared to someone with an ACE score of 0. For lung disease, that's 4 times greater. For a history of alcoholism, a 7 times greater chance. In fact, ACEs are associated with 6 of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States. Now think about this. Drug companies are investing billions of dollars for drugs to treat conditions and diseases that often have an increased risk factor of less than 2 times. But what's being done about ACEs? Finally, and most shocking, they found that a person with 6 or more ACEs has a life expectancy that goes from 80 years to 60. That's a loss of a quarter of your life.
ACEs can cause toxic stress, the kind of stress that is so severe that it can stunt the growth and development of the brain.
When we look at a CT scan of the brains of 2 3-year-old children, we see an extreme difference between the one raised in a normal, healthy environment and the one that was raised under conditions of extreme neglect. The most common effect of toxic stress is on brain function. Toxic stress causes overactivity of the part of the brain that controls and regulates fight or flight, but it shuts down and stunts the development of the part of the brain that's important for regulating self-control, planning for the future, empathy, reasoning, and controlling impulsive actions. This has real-life implications for what's happening in our city. Research out of the crime lab at the University of Chicago has found that when it comes to homicides in our city, there is a disturbing, unfortunate formula. It tends to involve young men, there's some disagreement, and impulsive action with a gun around, leading to a dead body. Again, we're talking about this because impulsivity is controlled by a part of the brain that is significantly affected by toxic stress. But here's the thing, we know that not everybody who's experienced trauma in their childhood is doomed to these consequences. I mean, we all know people in our lives who have made it against the odds. So what is it about the people who are able to be resilient and live a healthy, adjusted life despite having high numbers of ACEs?
Whenever a young person, and especially a young person who has a history of trauma and other kinds of violations, whenever they can have access to a person who is compassionate and stable and supportive and who really believes in them and can help them see a future, that young person is going to be well positioned to not only be able to overcome some of those very serious traumatic experiences that unfortunately do happen in their past, but they're also going to be able to really eventually take ownership for their own future, and that's really what we want.
Research out of Harvard and many other institutions has found that the single most important factor to promote resilience in the face of adversity is a loving, stable, consistent relationship with an adult. It's not medication, not technology. The solution isn't in programs, it's simply in the presence of a loving and caring adult. And this is what GRIP does. That's why I'm so excited to share this with you. Many of the youth involved with GRIP have already experienced tremendous amounts of adversity and trauma in their lives. Not just the ACEs that we talked about, but also economic and educational disadvantage, racism, violence, and as we'll see next, fatherlessness.